Awakening without embellishments. The border between the United States and Mexico is not a line on a map, but a thin boundary between life and death. Here everything happens at the limits of possibility. Ruthless landscapes, brutal people, and systems that do not forgive mistakes. The border stretches for 3,145 miles. And along this path, there are sections where attempting to cross it turns into a game with fate. Somewhere below, right beneath this border, lies another world. A network of underground tunnels, created not by the state, but by criminal cartels. They go deep underground, hidden from cameras and patrols, piercing the border like veins. Everything passes through these secret passages. Drugs, weapons, people. They have become the last hope for those who cannot pass officially and a deadly trap. For those who haven't paid enough, just imagine, annually there are recorded between 300,000 to 400,000 attempts of illegal crossing here. It's as if an entire large city repeatedly tried to break through the desert. Barbed wire and patrols with thermal imaging cameras. Since the beginning of the new millennium, more than 7,000 people have died while crossing the border. This is not dry statistics, but real lives cut short in an attempt to escape poverty and violence. It has become especially harsh recently. For example, just last year, more than 2.2 million migrants were detained. For comparison, that's the population of several large metropolises. What drives people to come here, knowing that the chances of success are slim? Perhaps it's the American dream that lures like a mirage in the desert, or the realization that only hopelessness awaits them at home. But some people do cross the border successfully, right? Yes, but each year it becomes increasingly difficult. The government is taking radical measures. Patrols are being intensified, ultra-sensitive motion sensors are being installed, drones monitor the area from above, and thermal imagers detect the slightest silhouette at night. And on the other side, Mexican cartels who are willing to sell a chance to cross, but at such a price that sometimes it's easier to die than to pay it off. The border is not just a boundary between two countries. It's a place where the interests of states, criminals, and ordinary people, who simply have nowhere else to go, collide. An echo of the past, coming to life at the border in childhood. I used to think that borders were invented just to make maps look nice, a line, and you're already in another country. But when I learned the history of this border, it became clear. It was drawn not with a pencil but with blood and wars. Almost 200 years ago, in the early 1830s, Mexico faced a problem that it had created itself. It allowed Americans to settle on its territory, in Texas. And then suddenly wanted to take everything under control, raising taxes and tightening the screws. How did it end? With a rebellion. And very quickly, Texas declared, "We are now independent." In Mexico, they did not appreciate this move and sent an army, but it all ended in disaster. The Mexican president was captured, and Texas gained independence. Then it escalated. 10 years later, the United States annexed Texas, and Mexico became so angry that a full-scale war began. What did this lead to? To the United States simply taking almost half of Mexico's territory: California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. For this, the Americans even paid $15 million. It's like paying a neighbor for a house that you took from them. The border began to take shape, but controlling it was almost impossible. In the mid-20th century, a massive migration of Mexicans to the United States began. Initially, they were attracted for work, but then it was suddenly decided that there were too many of them. In the 1950s, a strict deportation program called Operation Wetback was introduced. The name speaks for itself. People were literally swept out of the country, being deported by the hundreds of thousands, regardless of whether they were there legally or not. But most interestingly, the wall as a symbol of the border only appeared in the 1990s. Under Bill Clinton, they began building fences. But not to stop migration, rather to direct the flow of people into the desert, where they would simply perish. In other words, the problem was not solved with a physical barrier, but by counting on death. Today, this border is not just a trace of history. It is a monument to a conflict that has been ongoing for almost 2 centuries. And it seems it is not going to end. A ruthless matter, the price of freedom. There are no compromises at the border. If you cross it illegally, you have only 2 options. Either you make it through or you die. And the chances of the first outcome are becoming slimmer. When the United States government strengthens border security, it is not just building walls. It is turning this frontier into a zone where any mistake is fatal. Here, there are thermal imagers, motion sensors, border guards with automatic weapons, drones, patrols, and even special sensors that respond to the slightest change in body temperature. Add to this armed guards and strict laws, and you get a real digital trap. But if the state guards the border by the rules, then the cartels do so by their own. They earn billions of dollars from migration. They build underground tunnels equipped with ventilation and even rails for transporting people. They use catapults to throw drugs over and motorboats to cross water barriers. They know every loophole in the security system, but these insights come at a cost. Those who want to cross the border are offered a service package, for an amount that for most is equivalent to selling their soul. But even after paying, there is no guarantee that you will stay alive. People are abandoned in the desert without water, under the scorching sun, on difficult routes, and when they die, no one even tries to look for them. Bodies are found months, sometimes years later. And the scariest part is, this cycle continues. The more official routes are closed, the higher the cartel's profits. The stricter the laws, the deadlier the detours. It's not just a wall between two countries. It's a giant meat grinder from which it's impossible to emerge unscathed. The border has never been a dividing line. It's a battlefield where not only laws and the economy are at stake, but also the lives of thousands of people. Nature, devoid of mercy. Even if security systems didn't exist, the border would still be a deadly trial. It stands on its own. It's a natural trap created by nature. Water, sand, mountains, everything here is set against humans. The Sonoran Desert is one of the most brutal killers. Here the temperature in summer rises above 130 degrees, in Fahrenheit. The sand is so hot it melts the soles of shoes, and at night the cold pierces the bones. No shade, no water, only a horizon that never gets closer, no matter how far you walk. Many cannot endure it. They lose consciousness, they fall. No one picks up those who fall behind. No one searches for the missing. Sometimes remains are found months or even years later. Skeletons scorched by the sun. But the desert is not the worst part. The border runs through mountains, swamps, raging rivers. The Rio Grande seems calm and peaceful, but its current is relentless. There have been cases where entire families disappeared in its waters. Some tried to swim across at night when patrols couldn't see them, but got caught in the deadly trap of the current. Others trusted smugglers who promised a safe crossing, but abandoned people in the middle of the river, demanding more money for rescue. Somewhere in the north, the borders stretch through thorny thickets. The terrain is riddled with thorns so sharp that they tear clothing to shreds. Pieces of thorns get stuck under the skin, leaving wounds that quickly become infected, and yet migrants are forced to move without stopping, without medical assistance, without rest. A map with borders. It's not just a political line. It's an obstacle course where every section is a deadly challenge. Some collapse from the heat, some drown in water, others are caught by a poisoned thorn or a deadly snake bite. But even those who make it through this hellish ordeal cannot relax, because the most dangerous part lies ahead. The merging of worlds, culture at the border. If someone decided to erase the border between the United States and Mexico, many might not even notice, because here, on this line, cultures have long been intertwined. So much so that it's impossible to say where one ends and the other begins. I have been in border towns where you can walk a block and hear two languages at once. Here, Mexican markets are adjacent to American supermarkets, and on the streets you can simultaneously encounter cowboys in wide-brimmed hats and people in traditional sombreros. Burgers and tacos are sold literally side by side. People speak both Spanish and English, often not even noticing how they switch from one language to the other. More than half of the local residents are fluent in both languages. In schools, children learn both languages at once because it's otherwise impossible. Mixed marriages? A common occurrence. In some families, the mother speaks English and the father speaks Spanish, and the children grow up perceiving this mix as something natural. The border has created a unique lifestyle. Even the food here has become hybrid. Have you ever tried a burrito with fried shrimp and cheddar cheese? Or tacos with bacon? All of this was invented here at the border, where two worlds meet and create a third, their own, unique one. Music, art, clothing style, all reflect this blend of cultures here. In Tijuana, they hold American rock festivals, while in El Paso, you can hear traditional Mexican mariachi on every corner. Artists paint murals that combine the symbolism of both countries, and rappers from border areas mix English rhymes with Spanish phrases. But the most interesting thing is that the border not only divides but also unites. People here don't just live side by side. They create a shared world where laws and rules have long been blurred, and national differences have become part of one common history. Cities at a crossroads. The border is not just desert fences. It is also cities where life thrives despite all obstacles. They stand on both sides of the line, like reflections of each other. Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, El Paso and Ciudad Juárez, San Diego and Tijuana. Here, the destinies of millions of people intersect, who cross the border every day, legally or not. Take Tijuana, for example. It is one of the busiest border cities in the world. Every day, tens of thousands of people pass through its checkpoints. Some go to the United States for work, others for shopping, and some just to visit relatives. For local residents, crossing the border is routine, a part of life. Many live in Mexico but work in the United States because the wages are higher there. In the morning, they cross the border for work, and in the evening, they return home. But there is another side. In border towns, crime thrives, especially in those where cartels control the flow of migrants. In Ciudad Juarez, for example, the situation is so tense that local residents try not to go out at night. Here, disappearances are not uncommon. The police do not intervene because they are often complicit. But even in such places, people continue to live. New stores open, houses are built, schools and universities operate. There is a special atmosphere here, a mix of anxiety and energy, as if the whole city is living in anticipation of something important. Border towns are not just populated areas. They are zones of contact, places where interests, cultures, dreams, and fears collide. They stand at a crossroads between two worlds, not fully belonging to either. Here, you either find your place in this chaos or become its victim. A political whirlwind of change. The border between the United States and Mexico has always been a place of collision not only of people but also of political ambitions. Every new president attempts to solve the migration problem, but it seems that each time only worsens the situation. And if before these were just promises, with Donald Trump's arrival in the White House, everything changed. He came with a slogan that instantly became a symbol of the new policy: build the wall in the wall. Indeed, thousands of miles of steel fencing began to rise, dotted with cameras, motion sensors, and barbed wire. But if anyone thought this would stop the migrants, they were greatly mistaken. People did not back down. They started looking for new routes, more dangerous, more desperate. One of the harshest measures, the Remain in Mexico policy, now denied asylum seekers the chance to stay in the United States. While their cases were being reviewed, they were sent back to Mexican border towns, where they became easy prey for the cartels. The bandits knew that these people were fugitives. They had no money or connections and could be exploited in any way for labor, ransom, sale, or slavery. The harshest blow could be an order revoking birthright citizenship. If previously a child born in the United States automatically became a citizen, now this rule is being reconsidered. This order sparked a storm of protests. And while it remains under consideration, thousands of families are already afraid that even being born here, their children will be left without status, without a future, without documents. All of this is not just politics. This is the reality in which millions of people live. Politicians write laws, sign orders, and deliver loud speeches. But at the border itself, everything remains the same. People continue to flee, cartels continue to profit, and death continues to reap its harvest. The allure of the American dream. When you ask people why they are willing to risk their lives, for the sake of crossing the border, the answers sound almost the same. We just want a normal life. In their understanding, the United States is a country where you can work and earn decent money, where your children will attend good schools, and where cartels don't shoot on the streets. For most migrants, this is not just a dream. It's the only chance to escape from hell. In Mexico and Central American countries, the level of violence is so high that people are literally fleeing to save their lives. In El Salvador, in Guatemala and Honduras, gangs operate for whom murder is just part of the business. If you refuse to pay the protection tax, you will either be killed or taken into slavery. Many families sell everything they have to pay smugglers for the crossing. These are tens of thousands of dollars, amounts they have to borrow at huge interest rates, mortgaging their homes and lands. They go with the hope that they will reach the United States, find a job, pay off the debt, and start a new life. But the truth is that the American dream has long been shattered. Those who cross the border enter a country where they are not awaited. They have to work for pennies, live in slums, and fear the police and deportation. Many remain undocumented, hiding in the shadows for years. They cannot call an ambulance if they fall ill, nor can they go to the police if they are attacked. But even knowing all these risks, people continue to come. Because on the other side of the border, they have neither jobs, nor security, nor hope. And here, despite the enormous difficulties, there is at least a chance. Explosion of rebellion and resistance. The stricter the border control becomes, the more tension grows. People do not want to be just victims of the system. They resist. In recent years, border areas have become the scene of real uprisings. Remember the migrant caravans in 2018 and 2019. Thousands of people, families, children, and the elderly moved towards the border, hoping to break through the fences. They walked for weeks, survived on scraps, and slept directly on the ground, hoping that the United States would let them in. But when they reached the border, they were met not with open arms but with tear gas and rubber bullets. Refugee camps began to grow in Mexico. dirty, overcrowded, without water and food. Many of those stuck in these camps found themselves trapped. There is no way back, and ahead lies only the hands of cartels, who offer safe passage for enormous sums of money. Riots also erupted within the United States itself. Latino communities took to the streets in protest, demanding the relaxation of laws and humane treatment of migrants. But the authorities responded harshly. Mass arrests, deportations, tightening of regulations. Some activist groups began helping the undocumented immigrants. They set up secret waypoints, hid them in their homes, and transported them across deserted border areas. But now you can get a real prison sentence for that. The authorities declared war not only on the migrants, but also on those who try to help them. Resistance is growing. People understand that their fate is not decided in the offices of politicians, but here, at the border, where every day is a struggle for survival. And no one knows what the next step in this battle will be. Secret paths and risky routes. The more difficult it becomes to cross the border, the more sophisticated the crossing schemes become. Official checkpoints are reinforced to the limit. Thermal cameras, drones, hundreds of border guards with automatic weapons, motion sensors that react to even the most cautious steps. But people do not give up. They look for loopholes. One of the most common methods is underground tunnels. These are not just holes in the ground. Some of them are better equipped than city subways, with ventilation, lighting, and rails that transport not only people, but also goods. Mexican cartels invest millions of dollars in the construction of these secret corridors. Some tunnels are so deep that they are difficult to detect even with modern scanners. But not everyone uses them. The price for passage through such a tunnel can reach tens of thousands of dollars. For those who don't have that kind of money, there is another option. The desert. That's why Americans started building fences in cities in the 90s to drive illegals to where they would perish. People travel at night to avoid being caught on camera. Some wrap their shoes in cloth to avoid leaving tracks. Some try to cross the border during the rainy season when the sand becomes denser and doesn't reveal movement as much. But nature is not the only enemy. Cartels have long taken control of the routes and demand money for passage. If you don't have the amount they ask for, they might force you to work for them. Some women agree to go with the guides, even knowing that it will almost certainly end in violence. Men can be recruited as drug couriers, and those who refuse may simply be abandoned halfway. The border is not just a line between countries. It's a giant labyrinth with only two exits. Either you make it to the other side, or you are found months later or never. The tragedy of illegal crossing. Crossing the border is one thing, surviving afterward is entirely another. Even if a person has crossed the desert, avoided the cartels, and passed by the patrols, it doesn't mean they are safe. They do not become a citizen, do not get a job, and cannot walk the streets freely. Their existence turns into an endless game of hide and seek with the law. Right after crossing, most migrants find themselves in the hands of smugglers. They are called coyotes, guides who, for a large sum of money, help sneak deeper into the country. But coyotes are not philanthropists. If you don't have money, you might be sold into labor slavery. You might be left in a truck without water and air, as has happened before. Dozens of times, when trucks with migrants were found under the scorching sun, filled with bodies that couldn't withstand the heat. Even those who make it to the cities face new problems. No documents. No medical insurance. You can only work illegally. For pennies. At any moment, you could be turned over to the authorities and then deportation. If you return, the cartels might meet you with the question, "Where's the money you owe us?" Some find loopholes, forge documents, enter into sham marriages, work for years, saving every penny for legalization. But for most, life remains a struggle for survival. No room for error, and if you get caught by the police, that's it. The end. For the slightest violation of the law, you are deported without the right to return, sometimes even without a trial. They simply load you onto a plane and send you back to the country you fled from. There, the cartels might already be waiting for you, or the same fear you tried to escape from. The irony is that many of these people risking their lives are building America. They work on construction sites, in restaurants, clean streets, and take care of children and the elderly. Yet they remain ghosts in the country they consider their home. A moment of truth, escalation, or hope. Each year, the situation at the border intensifies. The number of undocumented immigrants is growing. Politicians are tightening the laws. Cartels are becoming richer. People continue to die. And the main question is, what is the point of all this? What will it result in? Supporters of strict measures say the border needs to be closed. More patrols, higher walls. But history shows that this doesn't work. The stronger the blockade, the more sophisticated the bypass schemes. The harsher the laws, the higher the income for criminal groups. On the other hand, opening the border is not a solution either. If everyone who wants to come is allowed in, the system will simply collapse. Social services won't cope, the economy will start to crack at the seams, and tensions between locals and migrants will reach a breaking point. Meanwhile, as politicians argue, people continue to come, continue to pay smugglers, drown in rivers, and die in the desert. Cartels continue to earn millions. Patrols continue to catch illegal immigrants who still won't stop. The border between the United States and Mexico is not just a line on a map. It is a line between life and death. A line that someone crosses every day. And perhaps the main question is not even what to do with this border, but when it will stop being a battlefield where someone's fate is decided every minute.